Hello and welcome. I'm Adrian Goldfarb, CFO of DUOT Technologies Group. This is the next in our senior management interview series where we highlight key executives and directors. The objective is to give our audience, primarily shareholders, a perspective on the leadership of the company. Today we have a special guest in the studio, Craig Nixon, who was recently elected to the board of directors. Our CEO, Chuck Ferry, had the honor of serving with Craig in the U.S. Armed Forces. Craig retired in 2011 as a Brigadier General, whose awards include the Distinguished Service Medal, Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. Since retiring from the Army, he's had a number of senior managed positions to focus on the technology industry. Please join me in welcoming Craig to the DUOT family.
Thanks, Adrian.
Welcome. To get started, perhaps you can give a short synopsis to bring everyone up to speed.
Sure. First, thanks for having me today. As you said, I retired from the military back in 2011. I started most of my time in special operations in the military and did a number of tours, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. And when I retired, I partnered with General Stan McChrystal to create the McChrystal Group under the thesis of kind of taking the lessons we had learned from transforming special operations to private industry. Mm-hmm. And to do that, we established an executive leadership course and then did that with a number of primarily commercial technology clients. And so I spent a lot of my time out in Silicon Valley with Fortune 100 companies out there, really focused on leadership and how do you change kind of in this constantly evolving world.
Right.
I left that in 2013 to take over a company called Academy, which was providing kind of high-risk security in Afghanistan and Iraq, and was the CEO there for 3 years. And during that time, we acquired a number of companies and grew probably one of the world's largest private security companies.
Okay.
And then left that, and since then I've really focused on consulting, primarily in the government space, but also in the technology world, on company scaling, sit on boards and still do some academic instruction.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. DUOT is probably a lot smaller organization than perhaps you've worked with in the past. What attracted you to join our board?
Well, I think really threefold. First is I really am more interested in companies that are trying to scale than companies that are already scaled. Mm-hmm. And after talking with the management team and seeing kind of where DUOT is at, I think it's really postured to scale over the next few years. So that portion was exciting to me. Secondly, as you mentioned, I've known Chuck Ferry for a long time. Mm-hmm. I think he's a tremendous leader. And quite frankly, any organization that he's leading, I want to help in whatever way I can.
That's terrific.
And then finally, I think the technology is really interesting. I think at its core, although you're working currently directly with railroad industry, I really think the AI and machine learning portion of the company is going to translate both to the U.S. government and also into commercial business.
So the company is obviously poised for some exciting growth in the next few years. Our audience would be interested to know, how can you assist us in our growth plans?
I think the strengths that I bring is really strategy, particularly market entry strategy is something I've been focused on for a long time. It's also change in kind of organizations, both inside the organization with the clients that you're working with. How do you bring technology into kind of older bureaucratic industries like the Army, like the military?
Right.
I think that's where I probably am best suited. And I also am very good from a standpoint of mentorship and leadership consulting.
One thing that we do kind of have in common is I also worked for a while in Silicon Valley. And I know that you've worked in and around Silicon Valley since you left the military. What was that like?
I had an amazing time there, and I think what I really enjoyed about Silicon Valley was it was whoever had the best product won, and there was a tremendous amount of talent and mm-hmm. very hardworking people and willing to accept risk to make changes, and I think that was why there was such an appetite at the time for, looking at the things that we had done to change special operations, which is very, from a culture standpoint, in a lot of ways is very, very similar. It's very talented people with a lot of drive that are trying to accomplish things. And fortunately, I've developed some really good friendships there, and they've become lifelong friends.
Any issues with the cultural differences? Because I can imagine it must be very different.
From a political standpoint, you may be on very different political views, although I think people would be surprised where political views are at. I think most of the military is apolitical. But no, because I think they're about winning, and quite frankly, the background I'm from is all about winning.
So we're winning, right?
And so I think all the rest of it is just kind of important, but I think the values aligned as well.
Right, right. So just in your initial look over the organization, what advice can you offer us with respect to strategy, particularly as it relates to emerging technologies in what I would call an old school industry, such as rail, where our major focus is today?
Yeah, so I think, again, as I stated earlier, I think the technology that DUOT brings is very applicable in the railroad industry, and I think we'll be able to expand that within that industry. And particularly with the changes that we're seeing, both from a security standpoint, with the impact of COVID, with all the other impacts, I think the technology that DUOT brings is actually tremendous. So from the standpoint, I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow within the existing client base. But as importantly, I do think there is an opportunity to grow this technology into other clients, particularly in the U.S. government, along the border, through entry control points. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities to scale the business outside of that.
Right.
So I think the interesting part how do you scale with the existing client as you posture yourself to grow into adjacent clients and continue to evolve the technology.
Right, right. That sort of leads up to a follow-up question. What do you think the biggest hurdles are for DUOT to overcome as a relatively small organization working with very large organizations like Class 1 railroads?
Right. I think the biggest issue that I see in smaller organizations trying to scale, I mean, there's twofold. In the short term, it's just cash flow and managing your cash flow as you go through that. I think you've got a great team that you're leading to start that. I think the larger issue is managing success, because I believe you'll win some big contracts, and I know there's some pending now. I've seen a lot of smaller businesses that once they win the big contract, suddenly everybody, like a kid's soccer game, runs to the ball and doesn't look down the road, doesn't look at the strategy. And yes, you've got to perform the existing contract, but you got to continue to scale the business. I think the management team and the board is critical to that.
Right.
In helping really the management team, not just focus on the current contracts, but also looking 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
Right, right. So once again, kind of focusing in, obviously your experience with technology, where do you think our technologies can be used in other industries? And I realize you're relatively new to this, so I'm just interested in maybe an early perspective.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I do think there are many opportunities with the existing product inside the U.S. government and over in a commercial business. But more importantly, I do think, there's a lot of conversation right now about AI and machine learning, and it's at two kind of largely different levels. At one level, it's a very conceptual academic argument, and then there's a very technical, tactical argument.
Right.
And what I see the opportunity for DUOT is really to scale from that technical, tactical, because of the iterations that you're able to do right now as it currently exists with rail cars, but potentially could be trucks or with other vehicles at border crossings or in entry control points overseas, to expand that AI machine learning aspect of it. And that's where I think it bridges from that conceptual academic level to the technical tactical level.
Right, right. Let's perhaps bring it up a level. I'm interested in, we're in interesting economic times right now, very interesting. And I'm interested in your thoughts on the current economic environment. and particularly the growing international competition that we get from, regions obviously such as Asia, or even the Middle East. So I'm just interested in what, with your wide background, what do you think about that?
The economic environment right now really is going to continue to provide opportunities for those companies that can leverage technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, with both the economic environment and also the safety environment from the COVID and some of the other security issues that you see around the world, the more that you can leverage technology to support kind of the routine maintenance and or security tasks and replace kind of individuals with technology, I think that opportunity exists and is going to continue to scale over time. And that's where I think DUOT technology really has an opportunity to continue to scale, not only here in the continental United States, but across the world.
Right. So I really appreciate the time you spent with us. We always end our interviews with asking you about an interesting story from your past. I'm sure you've got many of them, but our audience always likes to hear a little anecdote or something from that might give some insight into how you'll serve us as on our board of directors.
Well, it's interesting. I spent almost 30 years in the military, so I've lived, and then my parents were in the military, so I've lived all over the world. I've worked with a lot of different cultures, and so there are many interesting stories, because the military is a fun place to work, and there's in spite of all the things in combat, there's a lot of humor in combat. But I would focus on I'm going to focus on one of the tours I did in Korea. I was the commander of the Joint Security Area in Korea, mm-hmm. which is in the demilitarized zone. That's where the North-South talks occur. Well, in the Korean culture, they typically ask the business leaders to officiate the weddings. Mm-hmm. So because I was the commander and I had a very large Korean contingent that worked for me, I actually ended up officiating a wedding for one of my Korean officers. Okay. And my interpreter at the time was very nervous about the wedding, because it is, it's a huge deal. Mm-hmm. And he goes, "Well, aren't you concerned about it?" And I said, "Well, no, because they're not going to be listening to me. They'll be listening to you." Right. But it was a wonderful wedding, and it's just the opportunity to kind of enjoy different cultures as you go through.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Wanted to thank you for spending the time with us today. This has been another in our continuing DUOT executive interview series, where we get to learn more about the DUOT leadership team and their perspectives on the company. My name is Adrian Goldfarb for DUOT Technologies Group, listed on NASDAQ, symbol DUOT.